Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Mastering the Business of Yoga. I'm really excited that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. And this week on the podcast, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Sarah Harvie. Sarah has been leading people on their inner and outer journeys internationally for over 15 years. And Sarah has discovered great healing and wisdom from extended journeys through the wilderness and from her own deep inner practices of yoga and meditation. As she continues on her path of healing and awakening, she shares her practice with others through CranioSacral and massage therapy, yoga asana and yoga nidra, and wilderness yoga retreats across the globe. Sarah is actually somebody who I know in person. Her and I have connected because we've both spent time in Canmore, Alberta, and she happens to teach at the yoga studio that I've both taught and worked at as a manager. So it's really fun to chat with Sarah on kind of a deeper level about her business because, we've had passing conversations. We've chatted a lot about our mutual love for travel and the outdoors and obviously yoga, but diving deep into business is never something we've done before. So really fun to chat with Sarah in this capacity. And in this episode, Sarah shares how she got into yoga, massage therapy, and running wilderness retreats. She talks about how she runs an international multi-passionate business, including how she manages her schedule and all the moving parts of her business, as well as what she's learned through running her business. We also dive into Yoga Nidra, talking about what she loves about it and why this practice is so beneficial for us and our students. So lots of goodness in this episode. And before we dive in, I just want to give a little shout out to Offering Tree, the sponsor for this episode. Definitely go check out Offering Tree at offeringtree.com/MBO. If you've listened to the podcast for a while, then you know that Offering Tree is my go-to recommendation for yoga teachers for all things yoga business. And they also have a lot of educational components that they offer to yoga teachers and wellness entrepreneurs, which is another great thing about Offering Tree and one of the reasons that I love them. So I'm going to tell you more about that a little later on. But for now, go check them out. And I hope that you enjoy this episode with Sarah. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast today, Sarah. I'm really excited to have you here with me.
Thanks so much for having me, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really fun because you and I go back a number of years. We've known each other in person for a long time, and I know a little bit about your teachings because I've had the privilege of practicing with you, but I don't know all the ins and outs of your business and everything that you've done over the years. So I'm really excited to dive in with you here today. And I'm curious because you travel a lot. I think you're traveling more than I am these days. Where are you joining us from?
I am actually in Canmore right now, where our paths have mostly intersected in Alberta, Canada. And I'm just about to kick off a big travel season. So this is a perfect moment to catch each other. I feel like we usually cross paths at least every 2 years, whether it's virtually or in person.
Yeah. I feel like we had a good kind of rhythm going, I think, especially with kind of, if you were back from something, I was back from something. Obviously, the pandemic's kind of thrown everything into craziness and chaos and whatnot, but hopefully our paths will cross in person again soon. And I'm curious, where are you headed to next? What's kind of next on your radar? Where do you go after Canmore?
I am heading down to Idaho, to the Teton Valley, the mountains there. We are launching a project that's been in the work for a bunch of years. It's a psychedelics retreat.
Cool.
So I'm working with an MD down there, a medical doctor, integrative medical doctor, and we are working with ketamine and other psychedelics. So it's a medical retreat context. And I do all the integration components. So the yoga, the meditation, we have trauma-informed therapists there as well. And I also do body work with clients while they're receiving the ketamine infusion.
Wow, that's incredible.
A really exciting project. It's been in the works. I've been working with this doctor for a number of years, and this is our first time doing it as a residential retreat. It's finally, all the pieces have come together.
Ah, amazing. That's so exciting. And I feel like this is just probably making people listening excited to hear more about what you do, because you have some really cool like pieces of the puzzle that you've got going on with your business. But before we dive into that more, can you tell me a little bit about your backstory with yoga? Like, how did you first get into yoga?
Well, my mom did yoga when she was pregnant with me. So I always love thinking about that piece. And she intermittently did it while we were growing up. So there's definitely, books around the house or yoga mat. I was familiar with it. And then I really got into it right after high school. I was traveling in Central America with two friends learning Spanish. And one of my friends had a yoga practice. And so we would kind of roll out our thermarests wherever we were, or our foam pads, and do yoga. And that's where I really started to see, wow, you can feel, tired, hungover, jet lagged, traveling all the time, and that you can change your state with a 20-minute practice. And that's really where it hit for me. And then I just continued with that daily practice and began to share it with others on a lot of the wilderness expeditions I was doing. But it wasn't actually until quite a bit later that I took a 200-hour training.
What inspired you to take the 200-hour? Like what kind of made you feel like, hey, I might want to offer this myself, like bring it into my own business?
I think, like many people I hear at the beginning of 200 hours, I'm not teaching full 200 hours anymore, but what I hear from so many people at the beginning of them is, oh, I'm here for personal reasons. And for me, it was that month intensive. I was leading, month to 3-month long wilderness expeditions at that time. And then I'd have chunks of time off. So I wanted to take a deep dive into yoga for a month and be held in a container. And I wasn't, as I said, I was already informally teaching it on the expeditions, but I didn't necessarily have a clear vision that I would be teaching it. And here we are.
Yeah, that's amazing. So at this point where we are in your story, you're leading these wilderness expeditions. 1 to 3 months is that's pretty long. I feel like when people think about that, they think maybe like a day-long hike, maybe like a weekend adventure. Can you tell me more about like what you were doing with that?
Yeah, so it's an American company called Knowles, and they really focus on training people with technical skills and using the wilderness as this powerful classroom that, whether or not they pursue camping, again, they can transfer all the leadership skills that they've learned in this wilderness environment into whatever career they pursue, into their personal relationships. So specifically, I was leading whitewater rafting, whitewater canoeing, hiking, and backcountry skiing trips. And the organization itself does a ton of other cool stuff. So as I said, being out there, you're moving your body, you're getting stiff, you're living with people. So these intentional, optional yoga and meditation classes during the trips, even if there was bugs or rain or kind of working around all those things, were just that was my anchor that kept me grounded no matter where I was. And it was a non-negotiable for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then being able to, once you started teaching, were you able to kind of share those practices with more and more people through the expeditions you were leading?
Exactly. Yeah. It just became and still is interwoven more and more. And I worked for them quite a bit in India as well. So whenever I was in India, I'd extend my stay and spend a bunch of time in ashrams. That's really where I got into Yoga Nidra, which is the main teacher training that I'm doing at this time.
Yeah.
And I'd
sure.
have that chance to really immerse myself after. So it was so complimentary. And that's how I think I traveled for so long with different groups of people living out of tents, was my yoga and meditation practice, because I always knew how to come home.
Hey, yoga teachers, we're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Offering Tree. Now, if you've been listening to the show over the last couple of months, the last couple of years, you've heard a lot about Offering Tree. I've shared with you a lot about the features, the pricing, the benefits, and today I want to talk about the education that they offer. And you might be wondering, like, what are you talking about, Amanda? This is a software company. But one of the things that I love about Offering Tree is that they are offering education for users. And this is not just how to do things on their platform. This is on-demand learning webinars. So Offering Tree does 1 to 2 webinars every single month with amazing yoga teachers, entrepreneurs, and coaches. Some of the people that they have had on the webinars recently are people that will be really familiar to you if you have listened to the podcast. Yoga teachers and business experts like Jules Mitchell, Ashley Hagen, Shannon Crow, Mado Hesselink, Meg Sanjamino, Rachel Scott, and more. Each expert covers a variety of topics that will help you with your yoga business and your teaching. So, taking your teaching and your business to the next level. Things like building effective customer relationships, how to create an irresistible email incentive, how to clarify your offering, how to price your services, how to get started as a new yoga teacher, and so much more. If you're curious about this, you can head on over to offeringtree.com/webinars. Here lives all of the recordings for the webinars. If you'd like to learn more about the webinars, we're posting on our Instagram and email list, and Offering Tree is always sharing on theirs as well. So head on over to offeringtree.com and join their email list to learn more, or just bookmark offeringtree.com/webinars, and then you can head on over there and watch the recordings whenever you have a couple of minutes to do some learning for your business. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah, I think that that's so important, especially if you are kind of like more living like a more nomadic lifestyle or something where you're traveling constantly. Like there has to be something that grounds you, right? Because it's not the physical presence of a building necessarily that you call home. It's like you have to find home in a different essence.
Yeah. And I think the first indoor formal class I taught, or not, I think I know, was at the Yoga Lounge with you and Jeff here in Canmore. And it was really probably 10 years after I'd been teaching outdoors as a part of a bigger experience.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. I didn't know that you'd been like teaching that long outdoors and then stepped into the studio later. I'm curious what kind of made you want to teach in a studio, especially after teaching in such a different environment for so long?
Yeah, that's such a good question. A big piece of it, I think, was community. So being in Canmore, and I was always in and out and wanting to anchor more in the community. And the Yoga Lounge had always been an anchor for me whenever I was passing through town. So wanting to connect with and give back to the community. And then also, as you know, wanting to start to work with musicians. So the big piece of working, I worked with a variety of different musicians, all incredible. And then landing with Aaron Beach, the cellist that I still work with regularly. And we've actually done a lot of outdoor events as well. But the nice thing about the indoor environment is you can control a few more elements. So there's a few less distractions for folks, shall we say, the bugs, the wind. So people initially, especially when they're training, can really drop in deeper than when they're outside. So that part is really beautiful, especially for the practice of Nidra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And one of the things I'm curious about, just kind of weaving all the pieces of what you do together is where does the bodywork piece come in? Like the CranioSacral, you do massage as well, right?
Yeah. So I have a clinic space here in Canmore that I share with someone. And so that works out as I'm in and out of town, probably here about half the year. And the body work also has been an anchor. When people ask me, your business can seem dispersed or scattered, or are you going to pick one piece and focus on that? Those are questions I have had a lot. And again, to me, they all feed me and they all feed each other. And they're all these beautiful ways, again, for people to come back home and anchor in. And if I'm working with someone, they get so much benefit out of those one-on-one treatments, which are really more cranio now, less and less massage. And I'll often use Nidra and guide, kind of create an individual Yoga Nidra for the person who's receiving the treatment to help them go inward. So they're receiving those regular treatments. They're maybe coming to some workshops at the lounge to have that integration piece as well and help with their own daily practices. And then coming on one or two retreats a year to really help with that transformation practice. And my retreats are mostly wilderness yoga retreats, outdoors. So they're getting that outdoor element that, again, that wild space outside helps us rejoin or reawaken our inner wildness, our inner child, those parts of us that have kind of gotten dormant in all the pieces of day-to-day adulting, shall we say.
Yeah, for sure. All the time we spend inside, sitting, being serious. It's like we have to kind of find the balance, the opposite of that, which I think is really important. And I'm curious about so many different aspects of what you do. But one thing I wanted to just touch on was the different pieces, because I feel like I've also received that feedback of people being like, just choose one niche, just do one thing. And I'm curious, are you familiar with human design?
Yes, I am familiar with human
What
design.
is yours?
I am a projector. What are
You're a
you?
projector. Okay, I'm a manifesting generator. And I was curious because one of manifesting generators' things is that they actually like to have their hands in lots of pots. And hearing that was like permission for me to be who I am, which is sort of a strange thing because we shouldn't need that like external permission to just do what we want to do. But I just been told by so many people, mentors, coaches, you'll never be successful unless you niche down. And I was like, but I don't want to get rid of one of the things I'm doing. I'm multi-passionate. And yeah, I feel like my human design kind of gave me permission with that. So I was curious if you were maybe the same.
Well, I thought I was a manifestor generator because when I was reading it, I was having all those ahas. And then when Hillary Wood, actually at Canmore Hot Yoga, took my actual birth date and sorted that all out, and I realized I was a projector. And yeah, it's not as evident, or it's not when you read the manifestor generator, exactly what you said, it's like thriving with multiple projects.
Yeah.
And the projector definition is less so, but it still makes sense that it's feeding me, like the excitement, the different projects are feeding me. And then I need the breaks, the big breaks.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes the break is a break from one world or one aspect and into another world, another piece of the business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting that you were able to kind of figure out how that connects for you. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I feel like, just balancing multiple aspects of your business, having kind of like a hometown, but a place you're only there half the year. I'm curious kind of how you balance everything in terms of like, scheduling retreats, making sure you're filling them, coming back, integrating into the community, getting classes, booking workshops, getting clients, all that type of thing. Like, how does that work for you?
Well, it is a work in progress. And I think, like so many of us, like the human design stuff and having coaches or having chunks of time where we can zoom out and have that greater understanding of both our personality and the year. So trying to put out, okay, I want to do 4 to 6 retreats this year. I want to be running this many workshops. I want to be in the clinic this much time. And then also blocking out personal life time. So that big picture visioning and understanding that as a projector, I need big chunks of downtime as well. That otherwise, yeah, I'm going to lose my spark, or my light's going to get dimmed. So, one thing, for example, is my clients that come see me. I'm really, I thrive for the CranioSacral specifically. I thrive with the challenges. People are seeing their other therapists in town, and there's something they're just not getting to. I work really well with those breakthrough cases, or the cases where they're stuck and they're looking for a breakthrough, and we work together briefly and intensely, and then they can go back with their steady practitioners for that integration, especially if we've kind of blown something open. So where, for example, I'm not going to serve people is if they're looking for that consistency, that appointment every month. So that's been one piece that I've had to learn to let people know, so that I'm not letting people down, or
Creating
not
false
meeting
expectations.
not meeting their needs. So just being really clear. And again, even when I was talking earlier, people have told me over and over, oh, well, you should have a membership program where people are doing the one-on-ones with you, doing the workshops with you, and doing 1 to 2 retreats with you a year. And that would be something, again, we're having, potentially a coach or, someone to help me implement that structure, because ultimately with everything I'm juggling, I haven't created the time or space to zoom out and create those bigger picture things.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's a way of saying there are pieces that are getting lost in having the more things, but ultimately I've tried really just focusing on one, and it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
So just acknowledge, creating my own expectations and then being really clear with clients that I'm setting them up really well. So, hey, if you're going to come on this really big transformative retreat with me, for instance, with the psychedelic retreats, we do have really good integration calls before and after with trauma-informed therapists. But for some of my retreats, it's be making sure people are set up with their other integration folks after, so they can get the long-term benefits of integrating what we do.
Yeah, I think that that's really great. I've had 2 experiences with ayahuasca in the past when I was in South America, and I feel like and it's not for lack of there being this available. It was just the lack of me, I guess, knowing that I needed it. But we didn't do any type of like retreat or anything like that. We just did the ceremonies. And I feel like what I was really missing from that was the integration piece, because it was such a profound experience that I felt like I'd just been like my whole like heart and head had been blown open. Then I was like, what do I do with all these pieces? And it took a long time to do that on my own. And I think being able to have that, especially for something that's so deep and so healing is really important. So I'm glad that you're doing that with that. And I'm curious, like how far in advance you plan. Like, do you already have things kind of sketched out for 2024 at this point? Or is it like you're still really working with the latter half of 2023? I'm curious, like how far out you kind of plan everything.
Yeah, I typically am planned kind of a year and a half in advance. So exactly, I've got 2024 dates in the books. And with this the medical psychedelic retreats, we are definitely on the cutting edge of this. I've done a lot of research, and there could be other people doing what we're doing, and they're just not on the internet. But in terms of everything we're combining, it's not out there. So I'm also leaving a little more flexibility into 2024 to see where and how this is going to go. So we have 4 dates on the books right now for 2023, and the doctor I work with is incredible and also works with an astrologer. So all the dates are based on alignments, based on location and our synergy and all that great stuff too, to make sure that we can hold the highest space for the participants. So I would say right now I have a little more space in 2024, just waiting to see how this is going to unfold.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I haven't set yet, because I'm just watching what's happening, I guess, post-pandemic, is with my Nidra teacher training, the 50-hour continuing ed one. I was on a roll of an in-person one and a virtual one every year. And then just watching here post-pandemic, kind of reading the in-person one. I'm not sure exactly where and where the appetite is yet. So those also aren't in the books. I just completed a virtual one that was super fun. And we had folks from the Caribbean all the way to New Zealand. So just kind of understanding that the online market is still really hungry as we're transitioning here. More in-person's available, but people are still hungry for virtual. And then figuring out, I ran one in Calgary in the fall in person, and kind of thought people would be hungry, and it would be packed, I guess. And it was a much smaller group, which was lovely for other reasons, but just trying to navigate the market and talking to a lot of other people and trying to get a read on what's happening there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of like planning that goes into all of this. I was just thinking like, going down, and you lead a lot of your wilderness stuff in the US, right? You go down for a good chunk of the year and do like river rafting and stuff. Yeah. Because like a lot of this stuff is seasonal too, right? It's like a lot of these areas, you kind of have to wait till it's like the good time of year, but then you have to book in advance, because obviously getting accommodation and all that stuff is tricky. And then, I mean, we both know, because we've lived in Canmore. I mean, Canmore is crazy. I feel like you have to know when you're going to be there months in advance to even find somewhere to stay that's not going to completely destroy your budget. So I feel like knowing what season you're going to be in the valley is also just a lot of things to kind of juggle and coordinate.
Yes. Yeah. And definitely, there's a fun part of it of like, ooh, I get to create, right? That creative, and that then, the seasonal work with the leading the trips, like the rafting, then the beauty of that is then I'm offline for that full chunk of time. So for me, that's so renewing. And it requires an extra level of organization, as you said, on the front end. And I've been pretty lucky the last bunch of years. I'm working with different Mount Royal University students as their practicum in the ETOL program. So it's the outdoor, basically the outdoor ed program. And I'll have a practicum student each semester. And that's been amazing support for my business. And as things get like a little more complex, there's more moving parts and pieces, sort of realizing I'm going to need to probably transition to, because by the time I train someone, we get in this awesome flow and then, their practicum's over. So getting someone on board longer term who understands all the.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely lots that you're juggling, but it does sound really great. And I know you mentioned the having those chunks of time where you're resting, and I definitely hear that that's needed, especially when you're so full on with so many pieces, giving so much, so much of your business is giving to others, right? So you need that space. I'm curious how you kind of plan for that in advance. Do you have a hard and fast rule when it comes to hey, I'm leading a trip, I take the week after, I'm leading a retreat the week after I'm offline, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I've started to build in more days on the front end as well of the retreat in more in taking care of myself, but also creating that energetic container for the participants. So spending a lot of time in prayer and meditation and energetically, we've done all the logistics, and there's obviously last minute logistics, and how much energetic work I can do in those days leading up to really set the container for the participants and their highest selves. So when they're walking in, and again, those calls ahead of time to get their intentions. And after retreats, yeah, definitely, before okay, well, the retreat's on Sunday, I can be in the clinic on Monday because I haven't been, been neglecting those clients. And now it's no, that building that week on the back end. But sometimes I will work more intensely for a chunk and to have that chunk of time offline. And the last bunch of years, those have been personal river trips with friends, 8 women, really close friends of mine. We did a 25-day trip on the Grand Canyon.
Wow.
Which was incredible. And the beauty of a lot of those rivers, well, it's a beauty and an up and a down, it's a permit system. So we pulled our permit months and months in advance, so that was a non-negotiable time.
Got it. Yeah. And what a beautiful thing to be able to do, right? If you had a full-time 9 to 5, that would be virtually impossible to take that time off with your friends. So I think that's definitely a win and a pro to the roller coaster ride that can be entrepreneurship sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so much work to get one of those permits. So if you get it, it's okay, everyone's dropping everything, people with young kids, everyone, yeah, pulled out all the stops.
Cool. Yeah. That's amazing. Were you going to add something?
Oh, for me, my learning from that one is next time we would bring a chef just to have a little more, it was such a great and incredible trip, and a little more chef would have added a little more time for personal yoga practice and those pieces. So kind of, I guess it ties back to just acknowledging how much we need to fuel our containers, as you said, because we're in this health and supporting industry. So we need to support ourselves to hold space for others. So, a couple of years ago, I would have said, oh, that's too decadent or whatever, but just really acknowledging, no, that would have opened up a lot of time we spent on prep and dishes, and we had a rotating schedule, but still to then make your yoga practice and longer meditation practice, again, a non-negotiable into that schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say I'm medium outdoorsy, but I hiked the West Coast Trail a couple of years ago, and it was really just incredible to me. Obviously things take a long time when you're in a house and stuff too, in terms of prepping dinner, but I feel you're working with the elements a little bit. So it's we'd get to camp and it's okay, how long do we have until the sun goes down? What do we need to do? Okay, we need to set up our tents. We need to set up our, sleeping pads, get everything ready, get out of our sweaty clothes so that we're not cold when the sun goes down, get nice and cozy. Okay, we need to start our camp stoves, boil more water because we need drinking water plus cooking water. Okay, now we're making food. It's I'm so tired. I've been hiking all day. Just want like something that's, not food that's in a bag. And that's, I mean, just like 7 days. But I remember just feeling like, wow, this like really feels like a lot. Like you kind of don't realize how lucky we are in our modern day that we really have a lot of conveniences, I guess you could say.
Exactly. And so the advantage of a raft trip is you can bring more freshies and more good food. And then you have more stuff, which requires more time to deal with it. So, but like backpacking, you have a little bit less stuff and you saw how much time all the systems take. So again, that was the learning there is, we'll bring a support person so that we can take our practices, the time needed for our practices more seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And that stuff's so important, regardless of what type of trip you're on. So yeah, I love that. And I'm curious, I want to get into the Yoga Nidra piece because I feel like this is, one of your areas of expertise and something that's just a really beautiful practice. I'm curious, like when you got interested in that and kind of what it was about Nidra that really kind of like pulled you in and was like, hey, I'd like to train in this. I'd like to teach this.
My first experience of doing Yoga Nidra was in India. So in both Rishikesh and in Bihar. So I studied ultimately in the Bihar lineage. But at that time, I had no idea. And it was a really interesting piece where I wasn't ready. I had a really, really deep experience in Rishikesh of Yoga Nidra. We did some movement, we laid down, the teacher started guiding us. I was seeing rainbows. I was seeing, literally my body, I could see my auric field. So my higher self was ready for it, but I'll say my ego self wasn't ready. And I spoke with the teacher after, and he said, you should really stay at this ashram. You have a lot of potential in this practice. So he could kind of see what was happening for me during the practice. There were about 3 students in the room, and we spoke after. And my ego, I made up every excuse why it wasn't the right ashram. I think the experience, I just wasn't ready to integrate it, or it freaked me out. So the ashram's way too noisy. Okay, you're in India. Good luck finding a quiet ashram. The schedule kind of isn't strict enough, so to speak. There's not enough structured meditation. Anyhow, my ego created a million reasons why it wasn't right. And I remember actually getting into a heated conversation. It was over an hour with this teacher outside of the ashram in India. And he was invested. He wanted me to stay. And we spent about an hour. Ultimately, I left. So I just wasn't ready. But that experience obviously touched and opened something in my consciousness. And once you see that stuff, you can't really unsee it. So it was... ironically, I did some other practices again, not even really knowing that it was Nidra, be woven in and having these deep experiences. And then I signed up to do my 300 hour in Calgary because I knew the teacher, Ali Bogart, and I really respected Ali. The other 2 teachers were Celeste Needham and Tanis Fishman. And Tanis and I went to high school together, or knew each other in high school socially, and not at the same school. And I had no idea that her component was Yoga Nidra. And if I did, I probably wouldn't have signed up. And so through the practices, again, I touched into some of those wild places that I had touched into in India all those years before. And I got really passionate with it. And I saw right away the way that I could use it in my CranioSacral practice. In that way, when people are just, their minds they're in such a state of fight or flight, and their mind basically needs to be fed some kind of candy, or it's just a great tool. I'm not going to say I pretend to know what anyone needs, but it's a great way to meet that part of them, so that they can really drop in and have that full, deeper experience if that's what they're looking for. So initially, I just started weaving it into my treatments and saw the power that way.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I've dabbled with Yoga Nidra. I mean, I've had, kind of intro trainings and my teacher trainings, and then practiced a little bit over the years. I've done one of your workshops, which is amazing. I've never felt more amazing in my whole life. So maybe the next time I'm in Canada, the stars will align for me to do another workshop. But I'm curious, like when you decided to create a teacher training out of this, like where did that idea come from? When did you decide to kind of execute on that?
Yeah, Lindsay Williams and I were running the Wilderness Yoga School. And again, incorporating, she has a similar background. She also did her training with Knowles with the outdoor school. And then she ended up getting married. Things shifted. She didn't work there for long, but we have a very similar background. So we saw this same vision of what we could do, again, basing the trainings in these wilderness environments to open people up to yoga. And the first time I tried to incorporate the Nidra training into the 200 hour, and it was, again, that creator or that looking manifestor generator. I look like a manifest. Oh, I have great ideas and we can do multiple things. And it was awesome. It was great. And ultimately, there's just too much content in a 200 hour alone. And I realized I had too much Nidra content and that it had to be its own thing. And so it was actually really Lindsay too who pushed me, like, yeah, go ahead, create it, turn it into a 50-hour continuing ed registered through the Yoga Alliance. So people who already have their 200 or 300 can take it, as well as people who are taking it for personal reasons. So it was, I won't say an accident, but it was a divine learning. And it was really awesome. Actually, this great woman, Lisa Smithwick, that you might know, she was in Canmore forever, worked at Community Cafe.
Yeah, I think I actually went to university with Lisa.
Oh, no way. Where'd you go
Yeah,
to university?
U of C.
Okay. Hilarious. That's
I'm pretty
awesome.
sure if I'm thinking of the right person, because I think I remember seeing her through social media. We knew each other and then kind of weren't in the same group of friends in school, but we're both in business, being like, oh, you live in Canmore too? That's strange.
Hilarious. Yes. And she worked at Community Cafe forever and then has since moved to the Okanagan and is doing real estate there. But she was in that original 200 hour group. So the future years, Lindsay and I ran it. We didn't have the Nidra in it, but Lisa was part of that. And she actually just retook the 50-hour virtual training. And it was so neat because she had her original notes. So to see, the seeds that had already been planted, what had evolved, and also what's evolved, obviously, in my teaching, because I've really taken it in a deeper dive or a different direction too. So that was a really cool full circle. And now she's teaching out in the Okanagan.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I love hearing stories like that and just cool synchronicities. And I think one of the things that is so interesting and challenging about the yoga space in general is like we kind of have this sort of like ambiguous amount of hours that somebody has decided makes you qualified to become a yoga teacher. And I feel like, the more people I talk to, the more I'm just convinced that it's really not sufficient. Like 200 hours is really not enough to learn about really anything when it comes to yoga because the well is deep. It gives us like little bites of everything. And I think that it's really amazing to have these like continuing education programs where people can dive deeper. And I think that, if you're going to be teaching yoga, I think it's your responsibility to continue learning and to continue your, deepening your own knowledge and your practices and being hungry for that. Because if you're just going to do a 200 and call it quits, I don't know. I feel like it's just not really enough to have a career forever with this because it's just, there's so much to learn. But yeah, I completely get that. Like, how can you spend as much time as needed for such a big topic when you've got so many other little things that you have to cover in order to actually certify people,
At the end of a Knowles course, we often say the Knowles course begins now. So
Yeah.
the process of discovery. And I've started saying that, at the end of, or I felt that way at the end of my 200 hour too, right? Yeah. The practice of yoga begins now. And it's the same thing with the Nidra training. Exactly. You're giving such a small little window. 50 hours is by nowhere close to enough. Now I feel in my teachings, I could easily offer 200 hours and people are starting to ask after they've been teaching for a while, okay, when's like level 2 or whatever. But I feel with all these practices, right? The practice of the journey begins at the end of your first formal training.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's beautiful to have these other options where you can kind of decide like where you want to take your career, what interests you most, and kind of dive deeper into like, maybe you got a couple hours of yoga nidra in your training and you're like, hey, I'm really curious about this because it made me feel really good. I'd love to deepen with that. And, I think it's the same with like business, anatomy, meditation, more specific things like prenatal, that type of stuff. It's like, I think we have to just have the curiosity and then go out there and search for a deeper program so we can continue learning, because there's just too much to eat, too much to consume in terms of what we could learn in the 200 hour.
I love that. Yeah, the other interesting request I've been getting for a bunch of years, and I wasn't considering it before, but was to run a 50-hour Kundalini one. And now kind of with the fall of whatever, Yogi Bhajan and KRI, or just that whole adhering to the KRI standards, I guess, because kind of realizing that they're created in a lot of ways. So now I feel more freedom. If any, the gift of all that is I hope we all feel more freedom to share these practices. So I have been considering putting together a 50-hour continuing ed with Kundalini, because I think people could just weave Kriya chanting or something so easily into an asana practice, right? A traditional class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I love that idea. I think that's really cool, because I think Kundalini is like the type of thing that's very unique. And when you go to a class, you're kind of like, I don't know what we're doing, but it feels amazing. And so you're like, I kind of want more of this. And I know I did prenatal yoga when I was pregnant here in Mexico with a teacher, and it was mostly just like kind of what you would think of traditional yoga, obviously breath work. We were doing slower modified poses, but she always had a Kriya in there. We usually did at the end some type of Kriya to kind of bring in the energy of motherhood and just, connect with our babies and, uplift our energy, whatever it was. And I thought it was cool how we didn't have a whole class. Like, I wouldn't say the class was a Kundalini class, but we definitely had elements of what I know to be Kundalini from prior classes and practices. And I loved how there was just little sprinkles of it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Kia Miller does a great job of that as well. She does, Kia Miller and Tommy Rose, and she'll do an asana practice first to prepare the body, and then a Kriya, and then chanting. But again, that's like a full 90-minute beautiful thing. But there are ways, you could sprinkle a 10 or 15 minutes into a 75-minute class.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. And so I'm curious, Sarah, do you have any, and we've kind of talked about little pieces of this, but I'm curious, what are like the top business lessons that you've learned, throughout your career so far, through all the different aspects and elements of things that you've done?
I think one piece I've been really lucky with, and that has helped me keep going, is a lot of the retreats I run are partnerships. So running that partnership with different venues, backcountry lodges, that kind of thing. And for me, that took so much of the pressure, the financial pressure off of not dropping those $10,000, $20,000 bookings ahead of time. And then I had more joy and space to co-create with them to fill the venue in their off season. Those partnerships really helped me. And then especially, when the pandemic hit, that I didn't have these huge losses as well.
Yeah.
I know a lot of my friends who'd already booked, say, their month-long training in Mexico or India or Bali, and then suddenly you've lost that month deposit. So I really feel for everyone that happened to. And I feel very lucky that I ended up in this partnership realm. And now even post-pandemic, so we're getting creative together, okay, how do we fill those again? How do we read the market? Feeling, can be isolating, and the financial burden can feel a little overwhelming. So I think creating community and partnership where you can. And in that also, I have so much reverence for the people that do have the bricks and mortar. So trying to support the physical studios as much as possible, again, to get those places vibrant again, because I know they're still struggling. So, running workshops, those kind of things in studios to get, we just actually had the Nidra and cello again at the Yoga Lounge for the first time since pre-pandemic. And we had 40 people in there, Amanda.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it
That's
just felt so good.
Out of this world to think about that. It's like 3 years ago.
Exactly. And everyone was just, everyone was so happy, the cello. Yeah. So really trying right now to say, okay, well, this is one place that really helped me with my business. And then how can I pay that forward to the folks who have been holding down the fort, right?
Yeah. I love that concept. I mean, even if you take the pandemic out of it, like how can we kind of look to the people who have supported us and held us up over the years? Like, is there a way that we can support them in return? And I love the idea of it not being like, sometimes we think of like giving back or supporting as like, oh, I'll do something for free for them. But it's like, for a studio, you bringing some of your people into that space for a workshop is a beautiful like symbiotic exchange, right? Like you get to host in that space, your people get to come in, some of their people get to know you. So I think that that's really, really amazing to think about, like, who are the people and places that have supported me on my journey? And is there something I could do with them that we could do together that we could kind of support each other with?
Yeah. And gosh, we need, more of that collaboration and less of that competition mindset now more than ever, I think, to move forward.
Yeah, I was just started teaching. I teach for Vancouver School of Healing Arts, and I teach their Business of Yoga program for their 200 and 300 hour. And I just had a new group last night. Actually, it was our first session together. And this is one of the things that I always talk about early on. And my philosophy is like, there's like almost 8 billion people on the planet. And until everyone is doing yoga, I feel like we don't need to worry as yoga teachers. Like there's so much opportunity for us to be reaching more people with our gifts and our services, and everyone's unique. And so I really encourage that, like, let's collaborate instead of compete with each other. Like, let's not have that scarcity mindset of like, ooh, somebody's might steal my class. It's like, no, there's lots of opportunity for all of us because we're all different. And, how can we create community? How can we be in partnership? Because I think these things are really important, because I found yoga teaching to be actually kind of lonely. It's like you think, oh, it's this beautiful like job where I'm in front of all these people. And it's like, yes, there is that. But often maybe you see your other yoga teacher friends like in passing of a class. You have to be intentional about getting together with people and making time to do things together, because otherwise, you might just be kind of the solo teacher that goes from class to class, studio to studio, serving your students.
And I think that was another gift when you asked me why I started teaching at the lounge. And I didn't know it at the time, but again, Jeff was so generous that we could use the space when there wasn't a class and meet up and practice as teachers, and just to have like breathing into that space where you are usually, like you say, working, or you're the space holder, and to be there as peers. And often we were all doing our own practice. We weren't even necessarily, or sorry, present tense, we are again now back in there. But just being and breathing and all, like being in the container together and feeding that space too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Amazing. Any other business lessons or lessons in general that you want to share with listeners?
I'll circle back to the one I mentioned before of just kind of understanding what your business is. And you may not understand that initially. I didn't, but once you understand it, to own it. So again, that if someone is looking for a steady practitioner, a consistent, steady practitioner, teacher of yoga, someone that they're coming to their class, say every week at the lounge or wherever you're teaching in the world virtually, that's not my wheelhouse. And I recognize how important that is. So that people have their consistent teachers, and my wheelhouse is more the big transformative experience, be it a retreat, a workshop, a training. And so if that's what people are looking for, that's what I offer, and owning that. And it could look different. So again, not saying, no, I'm just going to specialize in one part of my business, that it's all part of it, but I own that. We come in, we dive super deep, we shake things up. It's going to be fun, but it'll also be a little bit uncomfortable. And then you're going to need your other practitioners, or like you were saying, when you went to and did the ayahuasca, like because you have your steady teachers, your steady practice, you were able to integrate it. But I've talked to many people who didn't have those people. And it can be a very destabilizing experience. And that is not what we're going for in the yoga industry or the healing space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that, because I think that we're all kind of drawn to, different things, and we want different things out of our business. We're all looking to kind of create something that really serves us and our people. And I think that there's a lot of noise in the world. There's a lot of like shoulds. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in the like, oh, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. And it's not to say that it's not worth contemplating those shoulds. Like maybe something is right for you, but I think ultimately we have to know ourselves and tune into that to figure out like what's going to serve us. Kind of like we were talking about, where we've both had people tell us, you should stop doing so many things in your business. And it's like, that doesn't serve either of us for different reasons. And that's okay. It's about us figuring that out and then owning that. Right. And I think that that's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so inspired by watching how you've done it. And you're continuing to do it. And you've really embraced the digital nomad in the yoga space. And like you said, you're able to be on the teaching side and the teaching of yoga, asana, teaching of business, raising a family, living in different places, not being tied down to one place. And also understanding that it is a two-way exchange, right? So you figured out, you need to feed yourself too. And yeah, so I'm really inspired by the shifts you're making in the world as well.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Amazing. Well, I could just talk to you all day because you're the best, but I feel like here is a good place to wrap up. Thank you. And I'm curious, can you share with listeners where they can go to find you if they're curious about working with you, maybe doing a retreat with you, doing your Nidra training? Where is all that housed on the internet?
It's all on my website, sarahharvie.com, and Harvie's IE at the end. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, Sarah J. Harvie.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Sarah.
Oh, thank you. It's so good to connect and see your smiling face.
Yeah, absolutely. Same with you. All right. I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with my dear friend, Sarah Harvie. Make sure you go check her out. She's got lots of awesome things coming up. Like she mentioned, you can find everything on her website, sarahharvie.com. It's HARVIE. You can find her trainings, her retreats, all of her classes, workshops, all that good stuff there. So make sure you go and check that out. A big thank you to Offering Tree for sponsoring this episode. Make sure you guys go check them out on social media, check out their Facebook group, check out offeringtree.com, and head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM if you'd like to get a little discount for listening to the show. And a big thank you to you, the listener of the show. Thank you for being here. I'm so grateful that you're here, listening, supporting, sharing, all the good stuff. It's been a pleasure, and I will see you next week. All right, bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.